Hi everyone, welcome to the US College Intensive webinar. My name is Alex Cork. I am the Asia Pacific Marketing Director for Crimson Education. I'm excited to be joined today by Martin Walsh, who will be joining us in just a moment. But first I want to run through some of the basics of the US College application, just so you can make the most of Martin's presentation. So just to quickly start off with, the top colleges in the US as they currently stand. So this is QS World Rankings from 2020 or for 2020, showing some of the top universities that I'm sure you're all familiar with, the likes of MIT, Stanford, Harvard, a lot of the Ivy Leagues I'm sure you'd recognize there as well. And you'll see some other universities there, including University of California, Berkeley, Duke University, Northwestern, UCLA, so all making that top 20 list. The US is definitely not short on talent when it comes to top universities. So we're really excited to be having someone like Martin here to really break down the college application for us all. So firstly, this is how to apply, or most commonly how students apply to the US, and it's through the Common Application platform. So usually there's a couple of different things that students need to do that you will need to make sure that you tick every box along the way. So firstly, there's the extracurriculars and leadership, and that's really where universities are going to want you to demonstrate your creativity and initiative, and they'll demonstrate your commitment and passion for a particular focus area. And it really shows how you're going to contribute to campus and the campus life as well. The next big hurdle are the academics. So that includes an SAT or ACT exam. So we'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later on. SAT 2 subject tests, optional AP exams, and yes, they do actually look at your high school transcripts quite closely, including your final exam scores. And the real thing there is you want to try and aim to sit the exams probably earlier than usual. You know, most students think that they will sit the exams during year 12. Year 12 is a very busy year as it is. You can actually sit the exams in year 11. So that's something that we generally recommend that students do. The teacher recommendations, usually 2 to 3 letters of recommendations that you get from teachers that are close to you or know a bit about what you do and what your goals are, and really gives another perspective of you as a candidate for these universities. And the next step is the personal statement. That's 600-word statement sent to every college that you apply to. So it's a really very, very important piece of writing, and unlike any other kind of essay that you would generally do in a school essay, writing or whatever it might be. So it is a very important piece of writing, and Martin's going to go through what that might look like for you as well. And it really is the number one chance for you to express your individual voice to admission officers. And then lastly, there's an interview, usually with a university alumnus or alumna, and it's really determining your cultural fit for that particular college. So moving right along, you'll see the suggested score guide here. The scores are high, I do know that, but it's mainly to ensure that you can keep up with the academic standards and academic pace of these universities. So for your top 10 universities, you're looking at around a 99 plus ATAR. Top 20, you're looking at around 98. Top 30, you're looking at around 97 or thereabouts. Now these are estimates based on the experience of our strategists here at Crimson Education. They do vary depending on your extracurricular profile and other elements as well. But the important thing there is that students typically apply with a predicted ATAR or IB score. Okay, so your ATAR usually comes out after the early decision round, so you need to make sure that you're getting a predicted ATAR from your school and you're chatting to your career advisor about that as well. Now when it comes to the fees in the US, there is something called the net price calculator. This can really help to figure out how much you're likely to pay as a result of studying in the US. It's pretty much dependent on your family's financial standing. There are 7 universities that are need blind to international students. That means that they won't need to see whether or not you require financial aid during the application process. So you can see them on the screen there. Other universities are need aware, and the more need that you ask for, the more it can affect your admission chances. So just be aware of that. And a general application timeline here. If you're in year 9 and 10 and watching this webinar, then I take my hat off to you. It's fantastic that you're researching your future now. And generally speaking, at this stage, you want to be looking at how you can build your candidacy. In year 11, you're looking a little bit at your candidacy as well as your application itself. When I mentioned earlier about sitting the exams for the first time, that's something that we would recommend doing, particularly the SAT or ACT. And if you can, it would be a great time to visit the universities as well if that's an opportunity for you to take. In year 12, you're really looking at preparing your application. In year 12, May to December, you're looking at your application strategy, whether you apply early decision or regular decision. And then in January to March, the results come back. So hopefully, fingers crossed, you get the results that you're after and you pack your bags for first semester in around August to September. But generally speaking, you'll see that the colors are a little bit different along the way. The later you leave it, the harder it gets. So please, the more preparation you can give yourself, hopefully the stronger your application will be. You'll see that students who join Crimson 2+ years are 4 times more likely to gain admission to their target university. Okay, so I just want to give you a quick introduction to Martin. Martin has 12 years experience as a counsellor to international high school students. He has 10 years experience training international school counsellors. He has 4 years experience as a Dean and Director of Admissions. He's a current member of the University of Chicago's Counselor Advisory Board. He's a former Assistant Dean of Admissions at Stanford and a former Director of Admission at Santa Clara University. He has an incredible amount of knowledge in this space. He's read somewhere near 5,000 applications or reviewed somewhere near 5,000 applications in his time. So he does have a lot of information to give, a lot of knowledge to give. So I'd like to now welcome Martin Walsh.
As a teacher, I was always intrigued, who was admitted, who was not admitted. And that's sort of what drove me into the college admissions realm. As I returned to the United States after 12 years abroad, I accepted a position at Santa Clara University in the admissions office. My goal, quite frankly, was just to put in 1 year. I thought it would be sort of a nice chance to understand the admissions model. That led down a completely different path. And over the last decade or so, I've given presentations in India, Korea, Russia, and now, of course, here I am in Australia, presenting on the college admissions model in the United States. I share this with you because I absolutely understand the frustration that career counselors and students might have in Australia and New Zealand as they try and comprehend the American admissions model. My goal with today's presentation is to walk you through the different models and give you a deeper understanding of what is working or not working when you apply to school in the United States. So let's begin in the admissions office. And quite frankly, after this seminar is over, you'll probably have more training than I ever had as I accepted my first position at an admissions office. The most basic question driving any admissions office is going to be, who do we admit? And quite frankly, that's going to come down to what type of admissions model you are running. So my goal at the end of this presentation is that you will understand the different admission models used by American universities. And then the second thing that goes beyond who do I admit is, what are those external trends impacting admissions decisions that have very little to do with the application and very much to do with larger socioeconomic or global political themes in the evaluation process. So let's start with in the admissions office, and kind of the question always begins, what do I evaluate? It's incredibly important for students and advisors to understand that there's 2 admissions evaluation models used in the United States. One model is numeric evaluation. And numeric evaluation is something that's pretty easy to comprehend because, quite frankly, it transcends borders. Numeric evaluation is used in China, in Korea, in India, and it really means that the reader looks at and focuses on test results and grades. Numeric evaluation is part of any evaluation model. It's the core evaluation model in the United States. But some universities stop there. They will just focus on grades, numbers, testing. Those are, more often than not, the larger public universities, the schools that are getting 100,000 applications, 115,000 applications. They don't have time to read a lot of essays, nor are they looking at the admissions process as a way to kind of sift out and create a community. So if you are applying to a large university of school, name of the university and a state's name, odds are that it's going to be a numeric evaluation model, and working with a counselor, you can look at your numbers, match up with prior classes, and get a pretty good feel for where you stand in the admissions pool. The problem with numeric evaluation when it comes to elite universities is that, quite frankly, it doesn't sift out too many applications. So in my time working at Stanford, and to a lesser extent at Santa Clara, the applications would land on my desk, and probably for every 100 students that I read, only a handful, 4 or 5, did not have a numeric profile that made them competitive for the university I was reading for. Quite frankly, we needed more information. And these universities that need more information have embraced something called holistic evaluation. The biggest clue as an applicant that you're being evaluated holistically is, quite frankly, the university is going to ask for letters of recommendation. They're going to ask for essays, writing samples. They're trying to get to know you beyond the confine of your transcript. They're trying to get to know you as a person. So holistic evaluation is the kind of complicated and unique system that you're going to find in the United States. I was given a presentation one time, I believe it was in Europe, and I was talking about holistic evaluation, and one of the counselors kind of dropped their pen and started to laugh. And he made the comment that it was so American. This feeling of like, it's not enough to have good grades, but they had to like you. And there is an element of that. With holistic evaluation, the reader is evaluating the overall quality of the applicant, considering so many aspects that go well beyond just the transcript. I tell my students that to think of a private university in the United States as being the equivalent of being invited to someone's home. You know, you might live in the neighborhood. You might even be my next door neighbor, meaning you've got the grades. It doesn't mean I'm going to have you over to my home. Be invited to my home or to my apartment or to my condo means that there's something that I think you're bringing to the conversation. And that's what holistic evaluation is trying to measure, what you will bring to my campus that goes beyond just showing up to class. In my opinion, when you're looking at an evaluation process that's being done holistically, there's 3 hurdles that the applicant must get over. And the first one is, of course, numeric. You need to have good grades. But after that, the other hurdles are a little bit more fuzzy and harder to define, but I'll do my best to kind of walk you through them. Let's start with kind of the first hurdle, which was explained, and it's pretty clear. It's numeric. If you don't have the numeric profile that's going to be competitive for my university, it doesn't do me any good to admit you. Now, I encourage all students and advisors to think of universities as amusement parks in the United States. And I say that because, quite frankly, amusement parks are filled with rides of varying speeds. I would argue that the amusement park rides at MIT are moving very, very fast. I think the same argument could be made at Stanford, Harvard, Chicago, some of those elite, highly selective universities. Those are fast-moving rides, and if I glance down at that transcript and I say to myself, even if the student seems smart or has potential, they're probably not quite ready for how quickly moving the rides are. And that's kind of the first 3 minutes of my evaluation process. I would pull up the transcript, I would look at grades, and I'd look for trends. You know, sometimes kids start a little bit slow in high school and finish strong. And try and also match up those course selections with perhaps the major. If the student says they want to study finance, I'll look closely at those math grades. If the student's thinking about medicine, I'll look closely at the science grades. I'll break down the transcript. Now, one thing to know is that how a university breaks down the transcript can truly vary from school to school. How we broke down a transcript at Santa Clara University versus how we broke down a transcript at Stanford was slightly different. But still, that's the starting point, of course. After that, you go over to the standardized testing, either SAT or ACT, either exam, it doesn't really matter. And again, you're looking for trends. There might be subject tests there. You might be looking at the math subset if the student's looking at a STEM major. And then finally, rigor. Within the context of the high school that the student is attending, did they challenge themselves academically? For a seasoned admissions officer, I cannot emphasize enough how quickly this process is. You know, after you've done this for a few years, you're probably able to break down a transcript. You probably already know a lot about the high school because that's your read territory. And this phase in the process is pretty quick. And as I mentioned, maybe at that phase you're losing 3, 5, or 6% of the applicants. Not nearly as many as students or counselors or advisors believe. After that, this is where it gets a little bit complicated. And this is the second hurdle in the evaluation process. And this is where universities are looking to examine the personal qualities of the applicant. And this will drive students and counselors and advisors and teachers a little bit crazy. And this is why it's actually very possible to be admitted to Stanford, denied at MIT, denied at Stanford, admitted to Duke. Every school, all these private schools, quite frankly, are hosting their own unique event, their own unique dinner party. What Duke values one year might be very different than what MIT values. What MIT values one year might be very different than what USC values. So this second prong of the assessment, those personal qualities, is where it can get pretty unpredictable in terms of the admissions outcomes. When you hear about like this second prong, these personal qualities, you're going to hear a lot of terms from universities. At Stanford, we talked a lot about intellectual vitality. At Catholic schools like perhaps Georgetown, Boston College, or Santa Clara, they'll bring up purpose, passion, and meaning, tying in with that Jesuit message. Challenges met and overcome, character, leadership. These are those holistic things that the readers will look for in the application. Now, for the purposes of this presentation, I'm going to focus a lot on that intellectual vitality that Stanford used because I found it fascinating. Working at Stanford was an absolute honor, and it was a thrill to kind of sit in on those committees as they tried to discern which student was best prepared to attend such a fast-moving and challenging university. Intellectual vitality could be something that really shows that a student has taken their learning beyond the classroom or they're not confining their learning to classroom. The intellectual part means that they're thinking, of course, but the vitality part to me signifies this sort of zooming, rushing towards knowledge, rushing towards experiences. Intellectual vitality can be exhibited in so many ways. I had a student that got their pilot's license. Of course, they wanted to study aerospace engineering. I had a student that was very interested in business and finance. So in high school, she had started an online business. I had students that wanted to be writers and they'd published pieces already. Students that wanted to kind of learn how to manage people. Getting a job at McDonald's taught them a lot about that. There's a lot of ways to show that intellectual vitality, and there's a lot of places in the application to see or discover that intellectual vitality. Defined, I would say that intellectual vitality is, as it's kind of marked up here, is the active enjoyment of and engagement in the learning process. And I think it's important for parents and students to see that it doesn't necessarily mean you've taken a lot of higher level IB courses, a lot of AP courses. It goes beyond just book learning. Quite frankly, if you're alive this far in the process at a highly competitive university, quite frankly, grades aren't really discussed that much. It really goes into things like you've assumed responsibility for their own learning process. You've shown maturity and self-discipline in the fulfillment of a project. You are, for lack of a better word, interesting. You're a curious student that is introduced to an idea in the classroom, but that classroom is just merely the starting point of your learning. That's the trigger mechanism to get you out there and exploring. And I think that's the best way I can define intellectual vitality. And again, I have to emphasize, it doesn't take the form of just grades. In fact, I can remember sitting in on presentations or committee presentations at Stanford where the student had amazing grades and amazing scores. But the problem was, after that, there was not much to talk about. The student lacked that vitality. And we called those applicants, sometimes we called them kind of flat applicants, applicants where there was not much beyond just the good grades. To use my dinner party metaphor, it's like inviting someone to your home for a dinner and they eat and they're perfectly polite, but they just absolutely have nothing to contribute to the conversation. There's no evidence that they're up on current events or that they're applying their learning. So that's kind of vitality, and perhaps I could show you a case study on this. I worked with a student a few years back who was admitted to Stanford. For all intents and purposes, a great student, played volleyball, good grades, but I think her vitality was exhibited by a math tutoring program that she began in 9th grade. This is a student that loved math, wanted to help her community, so she set up a tutoring program at her local library. As I recall, the library was just down the street from her home. Well, over the next 4 years, her program exploded. This particular student was a strong teacher who loved to work with kids. By the end of high school, she had basically set up tutoring programs at every public library in San Jose. She'd hired and trained 16 other high school teachers. The city of San Jose gave her an award, and the library system gave her the Volunteer of the Year award. So for Stanford, when you get an application like that, a student that wants to study math, a student that's interested in education, there's clear vitality. There's clearly a student that's taken their learning and gone beyond the classroom. I think that's a wonderful example of intellectual vitality. Another example are some students that I think had two passions, computer programming and eating pizza. And these students combined that passion and they started to develop an app that would deliver food to their home. The app kind of took off, and quite frankly, right now it's a rapidly growing company called DoorDash in the Bay Area. And this, again, showed that vitality of high school kids basically saying, what are we passionate about? Well, we're learning about computer science and programming in the classroom, but now I'm applying those lessons into my real life choices. In this instance, it led to a highly successful business that I often joke was sort of built around the desire to get pizza delivered. So those are great examples of vitality. Vitality can be an action. I am doing something. I am starting a business. I am starting a club. I'm doing volunteer work. Vitality can also be exhibited by the essays themselves. You're applying to a university that's evaluating holistically when you have to start to write. At Santa Clara, we had 2 supplement essays. At Stanford, I believe it's 5 supplement essays that go beyond just the personal statement. The more writing there is, the more that the reader has to kind of do a deep dive. What is this student about? What do they stand for? What are their beliefs? What are their values? Do they act on those values? At Stanford, there was a great line that was basically, a good essay could be written about riding home on a school bus and a bad one about string theory. It's largely about the development of an idea. More importantly, good essay reflects deep thinking. Good writing reflects deep thinking. So, you can look at a student that has wonderful grades, but if the writing is not there, if there's not strong vocab choices, if there's not logical connections between ideas, you've got a hint that within the context of a classroom, the student's doing well. They're a good memorizer. But if the writing's not there, you start to wonder, how deep is the intellect? How deep is the thought process? So that's why you get a lot of these questions. There's a whole other, I could sit for hours. I'm intrigued by the writing process, particularly for 17-year-olds. I'm convinced that every 17-year-old has a great story in them. I worry at times that the kind of school systems, whether they be in Australia, New Zealand, or the United States, whether we've drained out that creativity. I often joke with my students that a great personal statement could probably be written by a 3rd grader, because that's when you're in this incredibly honest place. But I do think that writing those essays that show that intellectual vitality is possible. And I talk a lot about helping students data mine, what are your habits, what are your life experiences, and then more importantly, connecting those experiences to your values. I'm not going to have you read a whole essay here. I think that would be counterproductive. But I would like you to remember that the college application essay is not therapy. The most common mistake kids make is that they use the writing piece to actually share too much information. To go back to my sort of metaphor of being invited to someone's house, I think of the college application essay as the dinner table conversation or lunch table conversation with your admissions officer. You're sitting down and you're sharing a story about yourself, and of course giving meaning to that story. Now I'm going to emphasize about yourself. It's very important to not write about your parents or grandparents. It's very important that the point of the essay is about what you value. The point of the essay really comes back to what you stand for. So you would look at, let's take an example here of a student that I worked with in the past, Adela. Excellent academics, really strong activities, wanted to study mathematics, and she wrote some amazing essays. One of the essays that she focused on was an experience that she was going through, which was her mother's diagnosis with cancer. Now, what I loved about it was actually not an essay about her mother. It was very much about how she was dealing with this diagnosis. And if you have the moment to read, you can see that she really brings the reader to a point where she sort of reveals herself a bit. In school, I had always viewed the accumulation of knowledge as something necessary to prepare for a profession. Black and white thinking that I am now embarrassed to confess. If pain is a pesky part of being human, then exploring ideas and sharing thoughts is a wonderful lifesaver. There to remind everyone what living is all about. There to heal like a burst of wind, pushing all boats forward, no matter how rough the seas. And I share this example with you in part because she took something happening to someone else, but still brought it back to her own revelation. And that's the point. When you sit down to write your essays, you data mine for your story. That's the easy part. A lot of kids think that's hard, but that's the easy part. The hard part is, what's the meaning of the story? There are a couple other examples here, and another student, similar experience. Her exchange experience as a student at a boarding school in the United States, and she really talked about trying to understand William Faulkner, one of the most complicated American writers, but also trying to understand her American classmates, and in the process, by remaining receptive to the ideas of others and willing to give and receive criticism, can the truth finally be revealed? She found that this study and abroad experience really got her thinking about what is the truth, something that had been taught to her in China, something that was being taught to her in Oregon, or something in between. Finally, of course, there's another student here that took an experience of being in a play. And I thought that was just a wonderful experience. I believe, if I recall correctly, this exchange student was cast in Romeo and Juliet, which she found ironic to be Juliet. I think she was the only non-Caucasian student on campus. And she talked a lot about her involvement in theater and how that helped her really understand, again, her life as an exchange student. And all these essays lead to these amazingly powerful revelations. And I think that's another great way to show intellectual vitality. And that's a big piece of the evaluation process. The structure of a personal statement has a strong opening, a narrative or story, and then finally a personal truth revealed. And for the students out there that are trying to understand this better, they focused often too much on the narrative. I think that the narrative is really just a delivery mechanism. The story is just a delivery mechanism. If a good personal statement's about 550 to 600 words, I would say the narrative's 200 or 300 words. The admissions into a top college comes with the revelation, where that truth revealed literally causes the reader to sit up a little bit, maybe even take a breath and say, wow, that's deep thinking. That student took a story that looked so basic and really gave it a lot of depth and meaning. And I think that's what you're going to want to be doing with your writing. So you can show your intellectual vitality by choices you make or by writing in the application. So there's kind of two ways to kind of get over that second hurdle. Now, I'll be honest with you. This second hurdle is really where a lot of applications go, sort of perish. Getting over the first hurdle is not as hard as you think. Getting over that second hurdle, where you've got that admissions officer reading those essays, where you've got that admissions officer looking at those teacher recommendation letters and saying to themselves, this kid's a deep thinker. This kid is really interesting. This is someone that I would want to share a dorm room with. This is someone I'd want to teach in the classroom. That's where you start to get a big chunk of kids sort of pushed into the deny pile. For every perhaps 100 applications that would land on my desk, eventually I would have to choose a handful that I would take into what was called committee. And committee is where I would actually present the applicant for admissions into the university. Now, you'd think that, my gosh, this student has passed over the first hurdle, numerically. The second hurdle, they've shown vitality. Committee should be a piece of cake. Well, there's a lot of things that could happen at committee, and I always thought this is where there was a lot of trends, hooks, and hidden agendas that might impact that applicant's ability to be admitted or not admitted. Let me explain. The first trend that's becoming more and more pronounced every year I'm in this profession is actually the program of study. How do I put this? I think the world needs more male poets. There's a real upward trend in STEM applications and a real downward trend in the humanities in some ways. And I think this is best illustrated by a screenshot here from the University of Washington, Seattle. And you can see that their comp sci application counts since the year roughly 2010, it's basically exploded. I just wish my investments in the stock market had such a trajectory. And you can see that everything else is pretty leveled off. In my opinion, computer science, engineering, business finance, those three programs are tough to get into. So much so that you might pass over that first hurdle. My God, this student has a beautiful report card and transcript. That second hurdle, these essays are powerful, these essays are interesting. It doesn't mean that I'm going to admit you, because if you're trying to open the door at the university that's full, it can be tough. And this is something important for everyone in the audience to understand, that a lot of students look at a university as a single door admissions. I'm applying to Cal Berkeley, Berkeley door. The reality is applying to Cal Berkeley is kind of the first step. The next step is really, which door at Cal Berkeley are you trying to open? If you're trying to open the Cal Berkeley EECS door, Electrical Engineering Computer Science, that might be one of the hardest doors in the country to open. There's a lot of kids lined up, and by checking off that box, in my opinion, your odds of being admitted to Berkeley have dropped precipitously, as opposed to I'm applying to Cal Berkeley as a psychology major. The programs are excellent across the board, please don't get me wrong. It's just where people are lining up. The best analogy I have, living in San Francisco and married to a Greek woman who loves to eat out, she always has to go to the trendy restaurant, and I know where we're going to eat by the line. And there's some big lines at some of these programs at some of these schools. And if you're in one of those lines, I don't care how strong your grades are and how good your essays are, you might be in trouble. So certainly major matters. That's one big trend that I've seen. And to illustrate that, Carnegie Mellon's computer science admit rate is 5%. I think Carnegie Mellon's overall admit rate is much closer to 25%. USC's computer science admit rate is 7%. Illinois Urbana-Champaign, 14.5% for computer science. Overall admit rate much higher than that. So the door you're trying to open up at a university can absolutely impact if your application lives or dies in committee. Engineering application counts. I've reached out to colleagues, and I was, Santa Clara University, where I used to work, which is a wonderful engineering program, not super big, but wonderful, right by Apple Computers. They've seen stuff like 12% application count jumps for just one program alone. So if you're trying to open that, if you think of American universities as a single door admissions, you're probably thinking wrong or incorrectly. You've got to understand that the door you're trying to open will absolutely impact your odds of being admitted. Here's a case study of a really strong computer science student that I worked with, basically straight A's, 1560 SAT, which is wonderful. And you can see that this is a student that got pretty beat up in the process with lots of denies. And for those comp sci students out there that are listening, I'm not telling you to change your major. I'm fortunate enough to be married to someone who works at Google, and I am absolutely amazed at how well you can do with that particular profession. I guess my point is, if I was going to apply to an American university as a computer science major, I would apply to more universities. I would try to open a lot of doors. I wouldn't sit there and say MIT or nothing, Caltech or nothing. The other trend that I'm seeing that's becoming more and more pronounced is the timing of your application. Not every school, but most of your private universities will split their application cycle up into the early round or the regular round. To put things simplistically, you keep your job as Dean of Admissions by filling your dorms, by filling the class with the best students possible, which means yield becomes something important. And yield is this: for every admissions offer I send out, how many kids respond, yes, they will come to my university? So I imagine a school like Stanford will send out 100 admissions offers to get, let's say, 93 admission deposits. That's a 93% yield. So schools like Stanford, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, they don't worry too much about yield. Other schools do worry about yield. First, you lose your job if you don't complete your class. And second, yield is one of the factors that they build into the ranking system, which is a flawed system, but it is a system, which is built into the ranking system in the United States. So a good dean of admissions is always going to have his or her eye on yield. The best way to ensure yield is to get a guarantee from the student that they will come. And therefore, some colleges came up with what's called the early decision program. The best way to describe early decision is me pulling off my wedding ring and basically telling the students, early decision is marriage. If you apply to the school early decision and the school admits you, you are now married. You don't apply to other schools, you will have to go to that school. So you might be wondering, why get married? Why apply early decision? The fact of the matter is early decision will often improve your odds of being admitted. The payoff that the admissions dean will give will be this, if you promise to come to my university, I promise to open that door a little bit wider. So you see schools like Cornell University, for example, that often have an early decision admit rate right around 30%, but an overall admit rate of 9%. Early decision is a great way for certain universities to kind of start to fill up their dorm, be assured of yield before they go into the regular decision pool. So one way to really improve your odds of admissions at many universities is to apply early decision. Now there's two other early programs I want to touch on briefly. Early action, which is dating, it's non-committal. You can apply to only one early decision school, but when it comes to early action, you're more than welcome to apply to 4 or 5 early action schools. They're not expecting you to commit to their school. And then finally, there's the most interesting of all, it's the single choice early action program that's out there. Single choice meaning you can only apply to that particular university. Early action means you don't have to go to the school. And of course, single choice early action is popular with, or used by, I should say, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and Stanford. Single choice, you can only pick one. If you're a top student out there, you can only pick one. And early action, if we admit you, you don't have to come to our school. Now, of course, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and Stanford, what we call HIPs, of course they're going to be fine with that because they know they're going to get their yield. They're not really caught up in that ED program. So early decision is a great way for schools to get their yield, particularly schools that don't want to compete with Harvard, Yale, Princeton, or Stanford. Defined, if you're going to apply early decision, you have to attend. It's the ultimate sign of what's called demonstrated interest. You're telling the university you're committed, and it gives you a clear bump in the admissions process. There's some facts and figures below that illustrate that with a few universities. I really want to focus on a case study of one university that illustrates this really clearly, meaning how you play your early card could impact how things are going to turn out. So let's say you decide to play your early card with a restrictive early action application to Stanford. Wonderful. If you get in, that's great. The problem is the odds of it getting admitted are about 3 or 4%. By playing that restrictive early action card to Stanford, the opportunity cost is you're missing out on schools that offer early decision options. So with this example, you see a student that applied restrictive early to Stanford and was not admitted. In the regular pool, they were also denied by Penn, Northwestern, Columbia, Carnegie Mellon, and Brown. All universities that offered an early decision program, all universities that offered a clear statistical bump. My guess is if this student had applied ED to one of those schools, they might have gotten admitted. But by applying to Stanford, by the time their regular decision application landed on the desk of the admissions officers at Penn or at Brown, quite frankly, the cost was half filled. There's no room, even if they had good grades. So think about opportunity cost when you're talking about early. Here's a student that I thought played their early card very well. A student from China, pretty strong SAT 1500, strong subject tests 800, 740, but he knew that it was going to be competitive, so he went early decision to Johns Hopkins and was admitted. My guess is that if you took that same application with those same numbers and put it in the regular decision pool, it would have been a deny. So that's smart. That's using the early decisions in a smart fashion. I want to share with you kind of a case study of early decision with a university. In this particular example, it's Northwestern University. So the Dean of Admissions at Northwestern is trying to create a class of 1,940 people. And in that group, there's going to be 400 engineers. So with their early application pool, they received 4,050 applications. They admitted 970, which, if you do the math, is literally half the class. So half the restaurant was filled by the time, before Christmas break, even before December. And of those 970, 200 were engineers. The fact of the matter is that with Northwestern, the engineering class is half filled and the entire class is half filled in the early decision pool out of 4,000 applications. In the regular pool, Northwestern receives 36,375 applications. Of that, they only have to get 970 deposits and 200 engineers. I think this really illustrates what I mean where early decision gives you a bump. The ED admit rate for Northwestern is about 26%. The overall admit rate is in that 6% rate, 6% for regular decision, overall admit rate 8%. So again, 26% early decision, 6% regular, 8% total. I think this is just the best factual evidence I can use to illustrate the importance of early decision for many universities. I would like to also add that early decision is, by and large, used only by private universities. The fact of the matter is that schools that rely on an early decision pool are often relying on students with families that can pay for the university. Early decision doesn't allow you to kind of shop around financial aid offers. And so therefore, large public universities, the University of California, the University of Texas, they're not going to ask for or have an early decision program. These are taxpayer-funded universities, and therefore it's unfair to have an uneven playing field where wealthier students have an in more than students that don't have the funds. So as you research an early decision, please recognize the bump that it gives you, but also the financial constraints that come with an early decision application. Moving on, and I want to take a moment to talk about extracurriculars. This is a tough one, and when I think about extracurriculars, and when I'm breaking down that application and I'm going into committee, I really think a lot, I always have the swimming pool metaphor in my mind, which is, I think that 9th grade and 10th grade of high school, your first 2 years of high school, are wonderful times to explore and try different things. But what I noticed in committee was that by the time you got to committee, it was never about the number of activities that the student was engaged in. Rather, it was depth of commitment. So just like a swimming pool gets deeper as you go from shallow, one end to the next, I think, early in high school is a wonderful time to explore. Try out debate, try out journalism, try out sports. But I think that by the time you get into your last couple of years of high school, I felt that in committee what people were looking for was more depth of engagement, taking on leadership, really taking on responsibility. And by saying that, what I'm really hopefully telling the audience is that, you should feel free as you get older to let go of those things that aren't really making you happy. You should feel free to let go of those things that are actually hindering you from showing intellectual vitality in other areas, the areas that you are truly passionate about. Never feel like you have to do something on the extracurricular side because it looks good to the admissions officer. I would actually argue that by the time you're a 15, 16, 17-year-old, you're starting to really develop your own adult personality and your adult persona. And let's see where that river goes naturally. Let's see if you're drawn to journalism. Let's see if you're drawn to debate. I just don't ever think it's about doing a ton of things. And finally, do extracurriculars have to align with major? Perhaps if you're truly interested in computer science and you start to develop an app that delivers pizza, well, that's kind of a neat thing, but I don't think it has to. I've had some kids that were amazing cross-country runners that hope to be engineers. There's no connection that I know of between those two particular activities. I think, quite frankly, what the colleges are looking for is just in your teen years, the maturity and confidence and willingness to commit to something. It doesn't have to be something that aligns with your career, but if you show me in high school that you have the ability to commit to something, what that tells me is that when you get to college, you're going to be committing to something on my campus. You're going to be an engaged member of my community. You're not afraid of the deep end of the swimming pool. And I would kind of keep that in mind. So to pull back a little bit, how many activities? I don't think there's a magic number. It's about depth of involvement. So in my mind, the first thing you do as you're developing your college list is you look, am I applying to which schools are evaluating me holistically, which ones numerically? The numeric schools are quite frankly going to have limited, if any, writing and letters of recommendation, and quite frankly, working with a good counselor, you should probably have a pretty clear idea on where you stand in the applicant pool, because you're running numbers. Most numeric schools are public, therefore there's no early bump, there's no early application. There's no early application to Cal Berkeley or UCLA. You apply in November and wait for your answer. If on your college list you've got private universities, those kind of elite selective dinner parties or restaurants, I should say, you're going to have more work to do. You're going to have to write essays. You're going to have to get some letters of recommendation. And more importantly, you're going to have to think about the timing of your application and perhaps even program of study. I strongly encourage students to do one thing that I think students across the board struggle with, which is doing a deep dive into the university. Don't just say, oh, I'm applying to Stanford because it's Stanford, Think of every university as an amusement park. Try and understand the rides being offered. So for example, Stanford puts aside quite a bit of money for freshman research alone. I believe when I worked there, the number might have been close to $3 or $4 million just put aside for freshman research. What you're looking for, therefore, are students that will take advantage of those types of things. Remember, this is a campus that produced Yahoo and Google and all sorts of other companies. So when you're reading the application at Stanford, you're looking for kids that are ready for an entrepreneurial environment. They're ready to explore. They're not just good memorizers, they're good appliers. They might even be risk takers. So look at these universities, try and understand the roller coaster rides that are being offered at the university and see how they match up with your interests. That might sort of dictate the list and also dictate where you're applying early too. What's next really kind of depends, I think, on your age or kind of where you're at in the process. If you're what's called a rising senior, at this point you're developing your list, hopefully finishing up your testing and starting to think about those pesky essays. If you're a 9th or a 10th grader, I would say start thinking about trying out things with your eye on getting into that deep end of the swimming pool. Know that no matter what program you're applying to, numbers are going to matter. The first hurdle is always going to be numbers. But work on being interesting. And I think one of the best steps to make yourself an interesting student is to be honest with yourself. Don't do things because other people are telling you, but rather start to listen to that inner voice that says, this is what I want to do. This is something that I can really excel at. This is something that I want to do a deep dive in. I think that's a hard thing for a young student to do, but an important step to take. And then finally, be engaged in the classroom. Going back to committee, those flat applicants often had letters of recommendations from teachers that said, boy, that Martin is a very smart boy, did all of his homework and always did well on tests. But other than that, I have very little to say. They didn't engage in classroom discussion. They didn't lead classroom discussion. They didn't ask for outside reading. Think of the teachers that you have right now as being part of your team. They're there to kind of help you in this application process. And the more you can cultivate those relationships, the more you can be a dynamic presence in the classroom, the better off you'll be in this process. Those are sort of the next steps that I'd be taking, and hopefully it gives you some food for thoughts.
So that was a fantastically informative talk. Martin's brought a lot of experience and knowledge for us here, and it's fantastic to get those insights, not just into the application, but into some of those hooks and trends that Martin was so willing to share. And it's a fantastic insight into the college application process. I hope no matter where you are in Australia or New Zealand, that you've been taking down notes and learning from Martin and his experience. So you might be thinking about what next, or indeed what role does Crimson Education play in the application process, and how can we support you through this complex application process as well? Well, firstly, I would really implore everybody here listening to the webinar to get excited about your goals. Learn about those roller coasters that Martin was talking about. Research these universities, download their international college handbooks, download their guidebooks, subscribe to their YouTube channels, subscribe or follow their Instagram. It's simple things, but it really helps you understand what universities are best fit for you. And then it will also help you through the application process, because universities will say, yeah, this student really knows about us. So really do your research. It's one of those things that in the US, it is very thorough, the college research that students and college counselors do. In Australia, sometimes we can just go by which university we think is best by the college ranking. So make sure you're going beyond that and really getting involved in the application process, and also what universities have to offer you. Now, how Crimson works? Well, our goal is for students to make the most of their potential by gaining admission to their best possible university. And there's our offices around the world. We're in about 20 countries around the world. We have offices here in Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane and Perth, and we also have our head office in Auckland as well. So our offers since 2013, so this is Crimson Student Offers. We've had around 950 plus offers to top 50 US universities. We've helped students secure $68 million worth of financial aid and scholarships, 193 Ivy League offers, and of course we support students to UK university applications as well, which includes 57 Oxbridge offers as well. You can see some of our stats over the last couple of years since 2013, the offers to some of the leading universities there in the US and the UK. And moving right along, so how we support you, firstly, it's goal assessment identification. I guess that's kind of working out, what are your goals, and are you at that kind of level that those goals are realistic, which is one of the first things that we want to do with every student, is to be really upfront and realistic and honest with, if you've got a goal of going to Harvard or Stanford or whatever it might be, are you in that ballpark is the first thing that we want to try and figure out. And in actual fact, are those universities best suited to you, or are there perhaps some other options as well that you might consider? Then it's about building your candidacy. Martin spoke a lot about being an interesting student, and that's definitely something that we help students do, is to be that interesting candidate through the extracurriculars and through developing in the classroom and outside of the classroom as well. Then there's the application expertise, applying early decision, applying early action, applying regular rounds. So really trying to figure out what's best for you, and based on the statistics, based on all kinds of elements of each individual college as well, and figuring out which course or major you should be applying for too. And then it's providing support, of course, through the essays. That's a huge part of our support, particularly for Australian students who aren't particularly familiar when it comes to essay writing or personal statement writing. So that's a big part about what we do, as well as interview support and, of course, preparing for the SATs and ACT exams. And then there's the global connections. Your tutors and mentors at Crimson Education are not people who are down the road. They're actually overseas studying, doing their thing at the moment, and they really give you fantastic insights into the college life and the college experience. And then when you get over there, a lot of our Crimson students say the best thing is, meeting their tutors or mentors on campus or during their travels around the US. So that's a really unique feature about Crimson education, and something that is so exciting to see when students form those fantastic relationships with their tutors or mentors. So we have personalized programs. We make sure that every student, has their own goals and has their own program. Of course, every student has different goals, so we understand that. We have tutor-student matching, so that makes sure that you're working with people who will really suit you in terms of your goals and what you're looking for. And we have international benchmarking. So one of the things you might look around and say, oh, I'm the best student here in my school, or I'm the best student perhaps even in your state. But are you the best candidate who's applying for Stanford from around the world? Well, because we're working with so many students now from around the world, we can give you a pretty good sense of how you might fit into the international application pool. And then there's, of course, talking about your progress and communicating that with your parents, most importantly, I guess, but also you have the chance to nominate your career advisor as well to receive a monthly progress report, just so they're up to date with everything that you're doing in terms of your application overseas. So the value of expert support, really it's about helping families navigate application platforms. It's giving you inside knowledge to find your best possible university and course. And admission officers at the end of the day, they do prefer well-crafted applications and students receiving ethical support. You can see a quote there from one of our past students, Akio, who got into Yale University. He's from Perth. But basically, he said that he felt like a student working with a US college counselor, which is, I guess, the kind of insights we want to give you through this process. So you can see here, student A had great, something that Martin was talking about, great on paper, but perhaps didn't communicate his story as well as he could have through the application, versus a student who got that support and was really able to nail the application and who got into some fantastic universities, including Stanford, Oxford Law, Princeton, and Yale. And this student, in fact, did accept the offer at Stanford. So you do work with a team of tutors and mentors, as I mentioned, and you connect with them through the Crimson app. This is something we've been developing over the last 4 years, and we're really proud to see how far that has come. You receive this progress report once a month, and your parents can get that too. And of course, there's these amazing tours. So this is a really great opportunity. If you're in year 9, 10, 11, and you're really thinking about going to these colleges, sometimes stepping on campus is the thing that you really need to know. Is this university right for me, or is it perhaps a different one? Okay, so we do these fantastic tours. They go all around to the US and UK as well. And you can see some of the tours that we have coming up. The AGSA US College Tour, that's unique to schools who are AGSA member schools. So that's the Alliance of Girls Schools Australasia. Basically, most independent girls' schools are members of that across Australia and New Zealand. There's also the Harvard-Yale Model UN, the Young Innovators Delegation, which goes to top colleges in California and Silicon Valley, the Youth Medical and Health Sciences Tour, and the Global Leaders Delegation. These are incredible, insightful tours. I'm still trying to go on one myself, actually, just as a staff member, but for students, it's a really incredible, unique opportunity, so would definitely recommend taking that up as well. The first step, if you want to learn more about how we help, or if you want to ask questions and more in-depth questions about the US college application process, book in for a free consultation. So that's basically a free 45-minute assessment, either online or face-to-face, with some of our lovely team just there. So it's really discussing the US and UK university options and the broad spectrum of universities that are out there and how to go through the application process. And we really encourage that parents join that call as well. So these are some of the questions you might ask in the consultation, whether it's choosing between the SAT or ACT, the impact of dual citizenship. So if you're a dual citizen for either the US, UK, how that impacts your application, what universities are best for the courses you might want to study, what are your actual chances of getting into universities like Harvard, Stanford, or Columbia, etc., and what subjects, curriculum, etc. should you take. So all these questions that you can ask to your academic advisor through that initial consultation. So that pretty much wraps us up for today. I will send you some links. You can see there's a few handouts there as well. So please download those handouts. Please visit those links to our YouTube channel. Please download the ebook as well to give you more insight into the US college application process. And if you want to book a consultation, please do so at the link. You will go direct to put in a form there and we'll be in touch with you to help secure that time in the near future. But thank you so much for tuning in. I know it's been a bit of a long webinar, but thanks for seeing it all the way through, and we look forward to hearing from you soon. Thanks so much and look forward to seeing you at an event in the near future. Cheers.